As the knights prepared to ride off on the great adventure, the king said these words: "There are two concurrent courses in your quest for the Grail itself and the quest itself. One is not the other, and one cannot replace the other, but they are both to be pursued with each yielding its own treasure to the vigilant warrior. Man, the conscious creature, sitting in the waiting room at the vet with their pet. What do people think about that their dog doesn't? Okay, then what difference does it make?" The simple believe that it's already been decided. And even if that's so, they still don't understand it aright. There are really only two forms of consciousness: the collective one, natural, automatic, and common to all, and the personal one, achieved only through private effort. In all mythical knightly orders lurks the distinct danger. One is that the Grail is so specifically described and the quest mapped in such detail that those involved miss the individual spirit of the adventure. And the other is that the whole affair is so lacking in detailed description and instructions that many warriors feel themselves lost and become discouraged. Where is the middle ground, you ask? It is where all potentially transcendental terrain always lies: within you. The speaker declared, "A man without thought is a man without problems." And the crowd roared its approval. And the speaker continued, "A man without thought is a man without sorrow." And again the crowd rejoiced. But then the speaker proclaimed, "A man without thought is not actually a man." And someone in the crowd stood and asked, "Are you certain?" And the speaker had to admit he was not. One man had a wild animal that would come and go in his backyard whenever it pleased. It pleased to do so constantly. It was just that he didn't realize it constantly. Unless engaged in ritual, the religious believe they are doing nothing. Unless studying, likewise scientists. Those in pursuit of personal consciousness always have something to do. Always. Men love a mystery, except for the very one central to their own existence, which is so plain and obvious that the only mystery is, why don't more people see it? The neural land of sheep. Part of the magic and distraction of it all is that flowing with a flock requires no effort, but to run alone takes all that you've got. One of the more alert knights off on the great expedition began to understand that the Grail is not a thing and the quest is not real travel. Talk has almost nothing to do with being more personally conscious. But if someone who knew hadn't talked about it, you'd have never thought about it. If you stare at the lights of the city, even if you don't agree with them, they'll still blind you. Gazing with the herd requires no effort. Individual sight takes all that you've got. Those who debate the difficulty in and the desirability of men telling the truth reveal their zero understanding of the natural connections between man's thoughts and tongue. In the canopy of all nightly aircraft must be a gun turret capable of a 360-degree sweep. The awakened may be plain talkers, but not straight shooters, since nothing of value or harm is ever straight ahead. The thing and the talents of man. Man's mind has both the ability to do the thing or to think about doing it. One way to keep a treasure hidden is to paint it in more mystery than it deserves. The nature of need to. Armies of true honorable knights never carry a priest, only bands of cutthroats and thieves. The thing about mentally residing in a human body is that you can live there for 80 years and hardly ever actually be at home. Hey man, where you stay at? Yeah, I'm talking to you. My, how the simple love to hear their name repeated. Helps reassure them that they're actually there. In other parts of the universe rage battles about which men know nothing. Likewise, within themselves. Pursuing personal consciousness is the only mental activity that requires effort. Now for today's out-of-city experience of ethics in metaphor. Evil, a generator. Goodness, a bicep. A more experienced traveler on the road told a younger one, some days are hot, some are cold. Sometimes the path is rough, sometimes smooth. Sometimes you feel encouraged and sometimes you want to quit. But one thing is for certain. Whenever you get used to your hair shirt, turn it inside out until you can find a new one. Many like to look upon the apparent vestiges of previous mythical wars, but many like to look upon the apparent vestiges of previous mythical wars. Thinking about areas of danger can be an ordinary man's way to safety, while serving as a ditch to those on a charge. One man said, if the key to wisdom is inadequacy, then what am I doing asking this question? Two approaches to working on the problem of achieving greater consciousness. One is to add to the problem, the other is to abandon it. And the third one, of course, is a combination of the two. Correction, the blind cannot mislead the blind unless they're on another world. One identifying sign of true mythical orders is that the knights are not permitted to discuss the quest while engaged therein. No doubt about it, when seen through squinty eyes, a planetarium can look like a freight train. How do men come to believe that talking about problems can be their solution when all human ones derived therefrom in the first place? As his understanding of what the quest required became clearer, one man mused, what I need is not the calm of meditation, but rather jarring, constant explosions. To be as precise as possible with language, you should not really say that there is any such thing as a mystic. Only those who might be instantly engaged in activities pertinent thereto. The ordinary die, then turn into nouns. The few live to become verbs. The sky over the city is continually peppered by gunfire. All is well, but none are secure. None but those in control of their sky. And nowadays, concluding, ponder. Was Adam driven from paradise for talking or for talking too straight? Well, hey, in the beginning, no one knew any better. Another ancient, brand new myth was just pointed out. And if you'll give me an E flat, it went something like this. For weekend warriors, it is much more interesting to hear someone who doesn't completely understand what it's about talk about it. Should they have handed me a different version? It is much more interesting to hear someone without a full understanding of what the thing is. But anyone who ever drums up any sort of audience, you could say, we will have to say to kill another 45 minutes. We will have to that in some manner, who suddenly pops up as a self-appointed mystical leader, teacher of some kind throughout history. It's not limited to any time or place. We will say, for the sake of the next 45 minutes, that they are wired up to understand a bit more. And you can look at that at a very pragmatic level, figure on the basis that were that not so, relatively speaking, they would have no audience. And I'm speaking of those who can attract some audience. So thus, if you walk through the woods and there was some guy that called himself Buddha the 119th, or Moses revisited again and again, and he was up there talking about this thing, and he had an audience, not just a one-time audience, but he had interested followers, then you would have to conclude that at the relative city level, the meaningless level, that in some way he understands or knows something more about it than they do, assuming that they're fairly sane people. To hear such a person speak is of much more interest than it would be to hear, still speaking metaphorically, let's say the real Buddha, a real Moses, a real Jesus. In other words, someone who knows what the awakening is about is not at all, assuming they've gotten taught, they're not at all as interesting, normally, generally, routinely, as someone who just suspects a little, knows a little bit, is more glib of tongue than the audience. All right, now let's spend, if you don't mind, the next 44 minutes. I'd like for everybody to think about that. Not now, but okay, 44 seconds. 4 seconds. Assuming as always that it is not a misleading statement, then what would one make of that? You know, another 45 seconds? What would one make of that? Well, one of the news items tonight pointed out that one way to keep a treasure hidden, one way to keep anything hidden, but I'll say a treasure on the basis that people are assuming that the experience of the freeing of the mind or the awakening, the expansion of consciousness, we will assume that those interested will look at as being a reward, a treasure. The news item pointed out that the slickest way, a way to keep a treasure hidden, is to paint it in more mystery than it deserves. That, too, is a quite valid, non-misleading statement. It is the other side of my opening observation that it's much more fun to hear a treasure. It's much more fun, and it doesn't even have to be mystical, metaphysical in appearance. It can be quite mundane. It can be the idea of lost Dutchmen's mines and all sorts of things. The more it is painted in mystery, notice, the more people enjoy it, the more people will be interested in it. As I said, it does not by any means have to verge upon the strange and metaphysical. If we just had a scene, picture it now, drawing upon your vast repertoire and past experience of watching movies, probably very serious movies, I'm sure, and television and reading fiction and etc. But picture, for instance, we'll get as mundane and dusty as possible, a Wild West town and a bar, and up to the hero strolls Gabby Hayes, number 2, little grizzled-looking guy with a beard, and he says, "Buy me a drink and I'll tell you something." And the hero says, "All right." And the guy says, "I got a map here of some gold that was left in place. Nobody knows about it." And that's it. Now, you might say that you could build a story from that. I mean, you certainly could, but would it not be much more interesting when the story is shrouded not just in mystery, but even if it begins to verge upon the unbelievably mysterious, such as the history of this lost gold, perhaps where the standard one is some of the conquistadors coming up through North America were being tracked by the Aztecs or by the Mexicans and decided to stash the gold. They knew they were outnumbered, and they knew that King Philip, or whoever was on the throne then, needed it. The man was short of ready cash, cash flow problem back in Spain. So they decided to ditch it. They not only ditched it in a cave, they left a map, but they were afraid the map would fall into the hands of their pursuers, and so they wrote it in some kind of strange code. Not just a strange code, but it has now gone through the hands. There was a man here in the western town from the English department of Harvard, happened to be passing through for God knows what reason. Man, a specialist in languages, and he looked at it and said it was certainly not Spanish, it was certainly no known language of the New World, and he didn't know what it was. Plus, if that's not enough, then the guy says, buy me another drink, if you hadn't got the audience whipped up. And that gets into the fact that 3 people in the last 50 years have translated it, knew where it was, and went there and mysteriously disappeared. And people who've even come close to it report seeing. These are sane, decent people. One of them, in fact, was the ex-vice mayor of St. Louis, was coming through town, again, for we don't know why, but a quite sane, a serious person was out there on the plains, got near the area, the reputed area, and came back and saw his hair had turned snow white overnight, and he came back and swore that he looked out there and it was a ghostly image of hundreds of Spanish conquistadors kind of shimmering like heat coming off a desert, except now it was these forms and them standing there with their spears. All that sounds much better. And you could count on the fact that if it actually happened, that the man at the bar would be, whether he actually goes after. But if you were staying there, would you not find, if you had your choice of the 2 stories, the short version, which doesn't take you but a second, plus you'd have got it after 1 drink. This story took so long, the old guy probably got 2 drinks, like, give me another drink. It's a long story. The first story was, I got a map here that tells where some gold was left, and some guys died and they left it there, we can get it. And there he is, clutching the little paper, and he says, there. But if he says, wait a minute, buy me a drink, and hold on a second, will you hear this story? And it goes into something like I did. Is it not much more interesting? What would you make of all forms of, even the public, the simple forms, as the transcendental experience comes out, obviously, in religion? What if religions were pared down to the bare bones? What if even civil behavior was melted down into all that it amounts to? What if all of the questions concerning man's psychological makeup, what if we just took ordinary people, not even exceptional people, but if we took the ordinary observations of everyday people and narrowed them all down, which we could, to 1 sentence having to do with the nature of man? What would all of those do, assuming again I'm making a valid observation outside the norms though, if we did all that to those kinds of human institutions, those kinds of acceptable, widespread, revered human activities and institutions, religion, science, psychology, the morality of man, and you took that which is obvious in the behavior of man, if an ordinary person could do it, or someone who could do it would do it, and extract all the subjective criticism of how man operates, and just took the obvious comments, the obvious descriptions of how life is through man, and it would turn all of these institutions, all these activities into the short version of my map story. The guy says, hey, I know where there's a treasure hidden, it's right here. At first you would think, well, that's my kind of talk. That's my kind of treasure. That's my kind of mystery. That's my kind, you might consider yourself reticent, straightforward kind of guy. Not a whole lot of bullshit to your life. And you might say, that's my kind of approach. A man says, hey, I've got a secret. I got something, I got a great treasure. And you go, I know where it's hidden. You go, where? You go, right here on this map. You would say, well, that's my kind of thing. That's my preferred version rather than your other one where the man ran you around in circles about ghosts and where it may be hidden and people dying trying to find it. Take the story, since I brought it back up in the use of the news items tonight, of the quest for a grail. a quest for that which reveals the secret of life. Notice the many variations this has gone through. Of course, that's the best known, I guess, in the Western, or it is in the Western world. But there are variations of it in every society on this planet. Always have been. But to take that version, they all amount to the same thing. That man lost something, in this case, a supernatural man, supposed to be Jesus in the Christian version, did something that had a direct connection to him, to his blood, to the essence of what he understood that was extraordinary, and it has been lost. It was given to someone to keep, and now it's been hidden. God knows why. And it's there somewhere. If we could just find it, and if you could find it, you would then have a direct connection to a greater state of consciousness. Do you understand how complex the map becomes, how impossible it becomes? If you take the story at that level, you cannot separate the supernatural from any possible operational reality to it. That is, some personal, individual use that might be made of the story. If you stop and try and, at the ordinary level, if that's where you start, and you try to extract the supernatural, if you try and extract hints, observations, the reputed basis of it being extra systemic, which is, say, supernatural, if you extract that from it, ordinary people would lose all interest in it. They would believe then that you have taken away the story. You have taken the heart out of the story. You would have people who are even non-Christian, who are students of mythology or literature, and they would say that you have taken the heart out of the story if you remove the mystery from it. If you remove the supernatural from it, even though they don't believe in it, they would say, well, you'd wreck the story. Because even though I do not believe in it, it is no longer even an interesting metaphor. If you take out the supernatural and say you're searching for this prize, and it's called a rail, and you say, well, what is it? And you say, well, it's a rail. You know, like I've never seen it, but they describe it as a rail, so I assume it's either like a handrail off of some stairs or maybe off of a train, but it's a rail and it has great power. If you can get hold of it, you can ride anywhere you want to for the rest of your life free. By no means will ordinary people find such a parable, well, they won't even find it to be parabolic, much less to be interesting. They just go, you just wrecked it. Again, you're faced with, if you see it, the beautiful self-protecting mechanism of life itself, whereas an individual, there's always, we'll say in general, for people genetically sound, that there is the possibility of one trying to bring what is called consciousness down to a personal level, one that is private and individual to him, which takes all the effort you have, and to go with the collective consciousness, to go with that with which you were born, which takes no effort. Assuming, just based upon, assuming is silly and just for children, so I'll withdraw it again, based upon the fact that you may observe how difficult it is to try and do the former, then you're left with the fact that life has no particular interest in people on a wide level engaging in this kind of activity. That being the valid observation again, then you're faced with a beautiful self-defense mechanism wherein life is arranged that if you try and point it out in a quite simple, direct manner, so I've got a map here, something that could be of interest to you. Man says, what? And you go, it's right there. He goes, oh. It will not do. If you give a point-blank description of what it is, you can get people to look in the same way that the old man at the bar could say, I got a map of a treasure. The guy said, let me see it. He said, you can say, well, you really want to? You got to ask. And he said, all right, I want to see it. And he goes, and sure enough, there's a line drawn that says, you are here, and then there's a line drawn with a big X with a circle. And he says, there it is. The guy goes, that's very interesting. And he'll turn away. He'll turn away not only in a movie, not only in a fictional scene, but in real life, people will turn away. Even if they look and go, oh. And by look, I mean even if they get a glimpse, even if they get a hint of that to which you refer, they'll go, oh, okay. The only thing that will hold interest is you must paint it in more mystery than it deserves. And I say you must, this does not happen ordinarily on this planet. That is, to where someone who understands what I just said does do that. What you're left with is those who paint it more mystery than it deserves, or those who don't know where the treasure is. And they are as intrigued by it, they are as taken aback or taken away with the story, they are as intrigued by it as their listeners. They're a little more because they can charge a few bucks and they can stand up here and make the others sit down. You know, they can say, I'm leading the dance. I know where it is, you people don't. So it makes it even a little more fun to an ordinary, not knowing where it is, treasure map, mystic, holder, old man at the bar guy. In other words, it is like, how about this? They have just telegraphed, I got this secret mic in my ear, they just sent me even a new myth, even since we got out here. And this one says, it's a lot more fun to be a half-ass mystic than a real one. Was that plain enough? It's a lot more fun to be a half-ass mystical leader than a real one. The point of this, as you know by now, is not poking sticks and trying to trip up people out in real life, because this is inside of your own personal nervous system. But consider this. The most visible one being, if the Pope actually knew what Christ consciousness was, or if the Buddhist church, as it seems to be now, if they had a Buddhist monk, he would look the same as the Pope. Well, they got the Dalai Lama, how about that? Those men, if they knew where the treasure was, would not be as preening, they would not be as proud of their position, they would not be smiling all the time, so delighted to bring down condemnation and point out that, well, we're all just still sinners, we're all so far from Buddhahood that it's not even worth talking about. But let's keep working on it. What is the greatest mystery in the world? The impossible. To be leading that which you do not know where you're going, is this a whole new definition of, this is way past irony, isn't it? Even Captain Irony would have to take off his cape and sit down. That humans enjoy not knowing where they're going much more than you say, look, I got a simple map, would you like to see it? And people say, well, okay. And you go, they go, huh? And you can say, do you want to go? But if you describe it in such terms, like my made-up scene of the hidden treasure, if you describe it in such a way that makes it sound as though it would be impossible to ever get there, just everything else being equal, you will not want to have a few people say, yeah, sign me up. Well, that sounds interesting. It is individually, when people get involved with such as this, if you had been around an operation of people interested in such as this, and you were around a length of time, you would observe that without certain trappings, without certain costuming, without certain paintings, patinas of a mystery, interest will decline greatly. Then you could ask yourself this. If the mystery is not presented, assuming again that I gave you a not untoward comment of saying that the way to keep something hidden is to paint it in more mystery than it deserves. Then you're left with also considering this. If the only thing that will keep people interested, even in something that seems at first blush to be the extreme, or at least the model of the mysterious, that is this kind of stuff, then if you still have to paint it in mystery, then what does it tell you about what it might actually be, the reality behind it? Was that convoluted sufficiently? I think it was. It started off quite simply. Simple. If you have to take that which is quite plain and obvious, quite individual and personal, plain and obvious is more offensive, so let's do that one. That which is plain and obvious, and you have to do all sorts of legerdemain, you have to paint it primarily and more mystery than it deserves. To keep people's interest in it. What does that say about what it is to begin with? And the part where convolution seemed to have gotten out of hand was the fact that when you first hear about such as this, you think, hey, that's weird, which is no way of saying mysterious. Or if you decide, well, oh, boy, that sounds highly unusual. That is mysterious. And even here that it's been called the Great Mystery. Or they were called, such people involved with it were called mystery schools. You go, yes, that's it. It is so interesting when you're young, when you're a young neophyte nipper would-be warrior knight. And it sounds so wonderful to hear about the quest, to hear about the great secret being hidden somewhere, to hear about the kind of activity in which a few people are engaged in great, huge mountain caves and underground cities, keeping the consciousness of humanity in toto pushed a tempo forward, and you get little tremors. And assuming it wasn't a hormonal overload at an early age, we'll assume that you were just on the verge of tasting that kind of intrigue of the great mystery. No one questions on their own for hardly a lifetime, if ever, on their own, why they're so intrigued with the idea of it being a mystery. That is so obvious that people overlook it to begin with. It's not part of the intellectual program, and it is that the nature of the mind is to be curious. I'm just talking about the ordinary mind. On a bricklayer, on a would-be mystic, it doesn't matter who, the nature of the mind, if it is genetically sound, is to be curious. There is no better description than that. The nature, if we're going to separate for the sake of the verbal mapping, the nature of the body is to stay alive, and all the sub-functions of sex and food and etc. is to stay alive. The mind has one purpose, to be curious. Therefore, it always finds of interest those things which it does not know. Does that sound mysterious, though? If you presented that to someone who decided that they wanted to, for God knows what reason, wanted to teach mathematics in high school, then they would find the mystery once they started. If they themselves, a fictitious person was in the 10th grade, then they would find trigonometry, let us say. They would find that to be a mystery, or if they were in the 5th grade. And they look forward to the day that they can study it, comprehend it, and then pass it along. It is a mystery. No one finds that to be in any way out of the ordinary. Then if you talk about the whole idea, however you stumble across it, using you generically, however a person stumbles across the idea of such as this, or begin to suspect that there was some other reality behind the publicly known religious tales and the myths, that there was something that somebody or some group of people have been engaged in that was far beyond these kind of public displays of ritual and repetitive behavior and repetitive and redundant speech. It is so difficult to pinpoint when you start that as soon as you hear it referred to as a mystery, if you don't come up with it with your idea on your own already, the idea of it being mysterious, the idea of it being hidden, just it seems self-evident. You almost want to slap yourself in the forehead and go, well, I should have known that. After you've been through the kind of paradigmatic travel I've described of asking your father, your priest, your rabbi, what's the purpose of life and this and that, and finally you realize that no one knows. All of your instant heroes not only do not know, but show no particular interest and show no particular disturbance over the fact that they don't know. In fact, try to shush you up. So then you decide that something strange is going on, and then to hear, well, the thing is hidden. What you're interested in is this great secret hidden work that was actually what Abraham was doing. It's what the whole idea in the Old Testament of there being giants on earth at one time. It was the idea in the Chinese of there being spirits that support, invisible spirits that are human in sort, but they are the ones who actually support us, that we're simply their shadow. that all these ideas, as soon as you hear it, if you're that fictitious generic person I just described, and you hear, well, the whole thing is hidden. What you're looking for, you'll never find. It's not surprising that your priest or rabbi, your mother, your father didn't know about it. It is a secret activity and always has been, and it just seems so. You think, well, that's it. That explains why I cannot find it. As long as it remains coated and bathed in that kind of mystery, as long as you assume that it is that mysterious, it will keep the thing hidden. It does not matter that life arranged it that way. We're back to look at the results. The results are such that it would come out the same if life was trying to hide it. And one of the stories tonight, I point out that those who go out on the quest, to use that parable again, the quest for the Grail, I split them up into several stories. One is that knights really out front in the great expedition finally began to understand that the Grail is not a thing they're looking for anyway, and that the quest is not a travel. But in between that and the opening story was pointed out that those engaged, or the whole activity surrounding the expedition or the quest for that kind of Grail, for that great mystery, has two inherent dangers, looked at from our kind of view. One is that you describe what seems to be the object itself, the Grail, or you could say a state of heightened consciousness, state of personal consciousness, as opposed to the common one. But the first danger is that describing too specifically the Grail itself, which all religions do, which all men purportedly holding maps who do not know where it is, they always do it, which makes it interesting, that they too specifically describe the Grail and map the quest itself and to a detailed degree, which from all ordinary views you should realize already is verging somewhere way beyond the pale of insanity. We have jumped Hadrian's Wall. We are now scaring the Scots. Now I guess they'll write me and complain of me using them metaphorically as the state of insanity. In other words, the comment is insane on its surface to say, well, the danger of those off on a quest for a certain goal, a quest, an aim, that the danger, one of them I point out, is that you describe the object too specifically. Which, what the hell does that mean? You're going to send people out and go, bring us the Grail, go bring us a piece of the cross, go bring us the scraps from Abraham's beard, the hair from Muhammad's head. And you go, well, what does it look like? There's hair everywhere. And so they say, well, you're right. So then you have to describe it. How it will look. Maybe you've got microscopic analyzation of it. You've got some DNA statistics. But anyway, or the Grail, let's make it more reasonable. You describe what it is. What size is it? And you want to take notes? Or, what the hell? They send you out. Go forth and do it. Go get it. And they're all ready to charge. And I say, well, tell us what it is. And you go, well, it's this box I want. And they say, well, could you be a bit more specific? And of course, you've got to. So it's insane on its surface to say that the first danger is to describe the Grail, the object itself, too specifically, and in too great a detail, map out the expedition itself. They're just more or less the same thing until you understand that they're not, but they're both insane. Right out of the box to say, well, that's insane. But I thought it got better, in my humble opinion. Because the second danger is that you do not describe them sufficiently, and all the knights will very quickly feel like they get lost and they'll get discouraged and wander off anyway. Seems nice that there's only two dangers to it. Or to look at it another way, you can say, well, those two dangers seem to be sufficiently, because that about covered it. That leaves everyone I can imagine out. There you are ready to go off on the quest, and you say, I'm ready, I'm prepared. Now could you give a little more specific instructions? And the king comes out and he says, well, this is it. And he describes in detail what it is you're after, the Grail. And they say, well, can you give us a hint? The world's a big place. Or how should we go about it? And of course, in all the myths, they not only describe the Grail, it's known specifically what it is, but also the quest. is given, is mapped out in great detail. You probably never thought about it in that way, but it tells all of the things. To continue along this line, it was in the chivalrous versions of the knights and the Grail and the quest, was the code of chivalry, is you had to undertake the quest under certain specific detailed conditions. They didn't necessarily map exactly where you were going physically, or else nobody had to go look for the Grail. But the mapping of the quest was done in too great a detail. It says, well, you must be pure of heart, you must be a virgin, you must not drink, you must never take the Lord's name in vain, you must never look upon another knight's wife with lust, you must always stop and help the poor. I mean, imagine it was enough having to write down the Grail, and they say, all right, it's roughly 8 to 15 inches high, so I got to get all that. And they're ready to go and say, okay, we know what we're after. And they say, well, what instructions? I mean, the world's a big place. Could you give us something about where do we start or what do we do? And as I said, in all the stories, not just the Arthenian version, but in all of them throughout the world, they don't say, well, you go exactly here, because that would ruin the story. Then everybody'd rush off, and if they say, well, it's right outside Liverpool, it's down in a cobbler's shop, and I'm not going to tell you exactly, but it's right off Trafalgar Square, then everybody'd be there. It's done another way. They do not map out and say and describe how the knights, how the seekers are going to arrive at the prize, but they tell you what is required of you to locate the place. And that's when many of the knights, I would suggest you, their little notebooks, they're going to run out and have to be borrowing paper from each other, because it starts. And the 10 Commandments is like child's play. It goes on and on about all of the things that must be a part of the knight, the seeker himself or herself, to ever have a possibility of finding it. And it just goes on, and it could stop anywhere. I was just exaggerating to try to get you to see the point, but it goes on with a whole handful of requirements. And it's true all over the world. You find it in fairy tales, but at any rate, it mainly has to do with some sort of purity of intention, but it gets into, even that's not mysterious enough, that's not complicated enough, and so it's always added such things as you must be a virgin, you must not eat meat, or you must not eat vegetables, you must not ride on Sunday or Tuesday. And it gets to be a whole, and you must always keep your armor shined. You can't ever let any rust get in your armor. It's an offense. The Grail will hide from you. And it's all these things you have to keep writing. But then it reaches a certain point. Life being what it is, life does not kill or overdo an audience. Notice life generally, with the mainstream life's act does not actually get boring to the point that you want to get them walk out. Of course, if you want to, you can. That's why life provides suicide. But normally, you die. Life knows how to keep an audience. I mean, by the time you think, well, I'm dozing off, life will come along and do something. Suddenly make you think you got cancer, you start pissing blood. Life will get you back sort of excited, like, my God. The point of that being, here goes the would-be knights out on this quest to find a thing. They think it's a thing, but to find this thing that will transform them, that will answer all questions, quiet all the inner disturbance. And they say, well, give us a hint. It's a big world. But rather than saying, all right, go to Liverpool and look for a cobbler shop, that's not interesting enough. They start then describing, the king would say, in most of the stories, whoever gives them the charge to go out and do it, they will say, well, I'm not going to tell you, we don't know where it is, so I cannot tell you specifically where to ride. The knights are supposedly riding off in all directions. That's the 360-degree sweep that one needs in a knightly aircraft in the turret. For those of you who had trouble with that one. What's wrong? You can't picture a knight in a P-38? Oh, ye of little imagination. So the king, whoever's sending them out, does not give detailed instructions. He does not say where the Grail is, because the whole purpose is that it is somewhere unknown and you must go find it. But they need a mapping. In other words, the object, the Grail, must be described, and the quest must be described. They're two different things. The looking for it and the thing itself. So the looking for it, they have to give enough instructions. That's why I brought up life always keeps its act interesting until it's ready, it needs your seat. And then it allows you to leave the theater. It's known as dead time. You may now leave, not just intermission or the rest of them, you may now leave permanently. But up until that point, equal to that, is whoever's sending them out on the charge when he describes the quest. It has to be interesting enough for the people to go off. I'd take my Wild West story and change it over to this. The king is sending them out on the quest. He describes the grail, and they say, all right, we got that. We know what we're looking for. What telleth thee, my liege, about the quest itself? And he says, all right, here's what the quest amounts to. The quest can only be successfully completed by, you got your pens and pencils? And they go, yeah. It then has to be interesting enough to make them ride off, to make them undertake the quest. Look at it another way. He can describe the grail. He describes, well, it is the object that is a direct physical connection to the extra systemic supernatural forces that created the universe. It is the magical, the sole magical object in existence. And so all the knights go, that's it, count me in. Then they say, what can you tell us about the quest? You know, how do we start looking for it? And then the king said, well, the main thing, you got to get off the grounds here, go across the moat, and get there and ride, and just start looking. Adios. How many people? How many of those knights? All prepared. All this, we'll assume, preparation. Sold all their worldly belongings. Had to go in hock to buy a first-class knightly outfit, good horse, rations. And then he says that the whole announcement, the whole description of the quest itself is, well, the main thing, you got to ride out of here. That's obvious. You got to get off the ground. And they go, yeah. And they say, well, get out there and hey, it's a big world out there. I described it to you. Get out there and do the best you can. Now, boom. I dare say there would be a very limited flow of knights off of the palace grounds. In the same way there'd be very few men staying at my western bar when they find out that the secret note or the map to this secret lost treasure is simply a line that says you're here and it points over there. Again, at first you might think, well, wait a minute, that's simple. That's the kind I'd like. If for no other reason, there's several ways. When I put it this crudely, and I'm playing both parts as always, an ordinary mind could absolutely naysay this and object that what they would, or what any sane person would prefer, would be a plain, straightforward map without all the hocus pocus and the mystery. There are at least two ways you can look at operationally how they are incorrect. One is what I just got through describing, if it does not sound interesting enough, you can't get people to move. And the primary interest to the human mind is something that is mysterious. There's got to be an adequate dose of the unknownness, or they won't ride off. They won't go see the movie. They won't read the book. They won't do anything. When I say they, we're talking about this. We're not talking about anything having to do with the physical survival of man. But with this, there has to be a good dose of mystery to it. But if they describe the grail, and they say, well, we understand the object. Now, how do we go about getting it? I'll give you another version. He says, oh, I didn't tell you? And they go, no. And he goes, well, it's over in Prince Philip's castle. It's about 30 miles from here. Just go straight down the road, and he's got it. Just go take it away from him. Now, again, you might say, well, hey, that's more like it. No, it's not. The only person might go down there would not be anyone interested in the mysterious or the mystical powers of the Grail. The only person who would go down there would be, I don't know how he got in a group of knights anyway, but would be just a would-be alpha male wolf that wants to go down there and kill King Philip. In other words, he wants to go down and take the ball away from him. It's like two kids playing out in the backyard. That'd be the only one if it was real, theoretically primed mystical knights. And they just had the Grail described to them. They all heard, yes. The king says, is that what you seek? And they all go, yes. And he goes, well, now I'll tell you about how to go about it. And they go, good. And he says, all you do is go out here and hang a left. I have to get out across the moat and go down, and it's King Philip. It's a big old green castle. It's got shutters. He's got it. The only person out of the whole group that would ride off then, you understand, would not be somebody after the Grail. I don't know how he got in there, but I'm trying to show you the story. It would be some bully. I've changed the metaphor again, as you notice. But it'd be like a kid that going out, and this night would ride off. He got no interest in the Grail. After hearing that, the only reason he'd go down there is to kick King Philip's ass or to cut his throat to get the ball, that is the Grail, and to come back and go, nah, 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 I got it. And then probably just toss it aside. If it does not have the proper amount of mystery to it, interest to it, they will not ride off after it. Those who should be looking for it are those who believe they are sincerely interested in looking for it. If it does not have enough mystery, they will not ride off. The other way of looking at it is even more plain and obvious, and that is that the description is too plain and obvious. Did I hear plain and obvious somewhere? Again, people will deny about my man with the map. He says, I've got the map that shows where the secret, the treasure is hidden, and the guy looks. The map consists of 3 things. An X that says you're here, a line going over here with another X, and it says treasure. And the mind says, well, yeah, that's it. Let's go back to my other scene. The king is out, and you have these people who say that they are interested in the great thing. And I'm bringing in a subcategory of the first 2 dangers. But you lost your place anyway, so you forgot. He describes the Grail enough that they say, yes, that's what we're after. Then they say, how do we go about the quest? What if then he described, not the sorts of run around I've been doing for the last few minutes, but what if he described, first off, he has to point out to them, well, you understand the Grail is not hidden somewhere outside the castle grounds. The quest doesn't require that you people ride off. Already, all but the most stalwart of knights are already beginning to get the blues, the disappointments. Think about it. There they are, all charged up. They spent a lifetime reading mystical books, having strange metaphysical dreams, ingesting exotic substances that gave them encouragement in their dreams, ephemerally, periodically. So that's what I mean. They're on these great horses. They believe they've reached the point. Brand new suit of armor, loaded down with mystical books and compasses, and talismans and almonds and pecans. Maybe they're from the south, so who knows? They're ready to go on this great quest, and they're all out there in the courtyard, and the great Fisher King comes out, the man who supposedly knows, and he tells them, it is the Grail we're after. That's what you people are after. You knights are from all over the land. You know, it's represented by the different colors of the knights, plumes and all, but anyway, you're all different people. You were pursuing what you thought was the mystery, the secret in your own way, but now we're all here together. You will now be under my command. You're now, I'm going to describe, no matter what you people call it, all of you from different lands, you different knights from different kingdoms, you're all after the Grail. And he describes it and tells what its power is, and they realize, yes, we never knew that was the name of it, but they all agree. So now you have this cohesive unit. They're ready to charge off or do whatever he says, because someone has now told them what it is. And there they are, the horses. We hope the morning's cold so that their nose steams. It makes the scene look better. It's bright and early in the morning. The sun's just breaking up over the horizon. There they are. The reflection off of their shiny armor. The swords all polished, sharpened. They're ready. And he says, okay, now about the quest itself to find it. They go, yes. And the horses are panting, doing their feet. And the knights are all ready to go. Yes, what is it? And he says, all right. The thing is now, the quest does not require that you leave the palace grounds. You do understand that by then, just picture this like in a film, and it pans around, and all these guys, you can see that they got their visors down to where you can see their faces, and they were all excited. You know. And he says, all right. And they're ready to go, and he says, you do understand, I got to tell you, the quest does not require a leaving of the palace ground. You've about killed the whole thing then. But let's assume that some of them stayed there, 1 or 2, but whoever stayed there to hear this out. Then you understand, he doesn't have to say anything like, well, I can't tell you where it is because none of us know where it is. And then he has to go through all these convoluted, complex, oblique, impossible to obtain aspects, characteristics, inner conditions by which one must be directed to it. That's the ordinary one, which it's impossible, and so you got the mystery for the rest of your life. You got an interesting, impossible to achieve hobby. That, or you could do it down as I said. I could narrow it down, simplify it a little more, and say, well, it's actually over at King Philip's. It's just to go down here, take a left, out there at the road, take a left, and it's about 6 miles down there. But to tell them you don't have to go anywhere, that's about ruined it. But then if you tell them exactly, you say not only do you not have to go anywhere, physically, you don't have to leave the palace grounds, but you have to do something internally. And whoever's left, well, let's say they're all left, that they try to hear it out. Then, unless you're going to make everybody just rip off their armor and beat them up and turn them into Cuisinarts or CD players or something, just give up the whole thing, then to talk about the inner expedition, you have to weave it to be as equally impossible, vague, basically incoherent, as was the original one of seeing people out, well, go forth and be a Christian, go forth and be a Jew, be a Buddhist, or follow these instructions of how it takes a virgin, a person with no ill thoughts, a person who always thinks of others instead of himself, a person who will always help the poor, a person who will never curse, a person who will never eat a ham sandwich or a hamburger. All these things, and you look at it and go, well, nobody can ever do that. You have to have that equally as impossible, an internal mapping, to keep the knights, to make anybody, for them to stay on their horse, to stay being a knight once you say you don't have to leave the palace ground. And by then you hear them all go, ooh, rats. You go, but wait a minute, it's an inner exploration, which really excites most people. But let's assume that the knights stay there. They've gone to all this trouble, and then you would expect at least something as equally complex, that they would take the external journey as described like religion, of all the behavior and the rituals, but the behavior, and you took it from behavior, such as Jesus saying, well, it doesn't count just because you don't kill people. You got to quit wanting to kill people inside, which makes it impossible. You can keep from killing people, but to keep from wanting to kill people, it makes people go, well, wait a minute, now wait a minute. Because it's basically impossible. It's impossible, scratch basically. It's impossible. So you've got to give people these nights to keep them even on their horses. Once you say, all right, it's not an external journey, it's an internal one. But wait, it's impossible. Well, you hear it, you can never do it. Then they'll brighten up. Oh, but what if the king could tell them, what if he says, all right, it's an internal journey, not an external one. They go, okay, well, listen, what's the rest of it? And let's say just in 5 or 6 words that he told me exactly what it was. That's the end of that tale. And that's the end of many, 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 many. Can you spell most people who ever get involved with this? Especially if the mystery begins to wear off. The mystery begins to apparently wear off, and they're not sure why. That's the worst kind. That's when you feel like, well, the train's getting rickety, or the trains are beginning to make too much noise. Back to my other allegory. I don't care. I don't know whether we're going to make it from Paris to Istanbul, but the train itself is beginning to annoy me. I think we'll get off for a while. I'm so used to it. The damn carpet's bare. I know everybody on the train. I walk back and forth, look out the window, and sometimes it looks like we may be going through Transylvania or at least getting into the Balkan areas. And then the next day I look out the window and I'll be down. I can see the shot of the Eiffel Tower. I'm no further away. And you think, well, the only thing to do is get off the train. Choo choo. Are we still dealing on, when I get 0 signs, that we still have a couple of minutes?